It's the king of Connecticut here, and I am here to honor my friend, my broadcast partner, my stand-up comedy partner, my pro wrestling opponent, the great UFC Hall of Famer, the American Psycho, STEPHAN Bonnar, with a book that he and I were writing together called Chaotic Enlightenments. And this book is full of stories from Stephan's life, and I'm going to read some select chapters. And before I do, why am I wearing this shirt with the boats and with a fish on it? Why am I wearing this shirt? Well, because Stephan was with me when I purchased my boat in 2020. and funny story, we're meeting an older woman. I was buying boats off of Facebook Marketplace and reselling them in 2020. And he tells the woman, "What should we call her?" referring to the boat. And he says, "We shall call her the Bearded Clam." And then he went back to Vegas, and I purchased another boat, which was nestled beside the Bearded Clam. And I called him and I said, "I have another boat. She's nestled beside the Bearded Clam. What shall we call her?" And without skipping a beat, Stephan said, "We shall call her the Salty Snatch." So I'm going to get into the book. Stephan loved boating. He loved fishing. And let's get going without any further ado. A celebration of the life of the American Psycho. Chaotic Enlightenment, an American Psycho's journey to peace through violence. Chapter 1. Broken bones heal stronger. As a kid, I broke a lot of bones. In the early days of the American Psycho saga, those bones were often my own. I was a fearless youngster, and my older brother loved to fuck with me. One of my earliest memories is from when I was 4 years old at church. My brother built a castle made out of cardboard blocks and dared me to jump over it. I figured, what the hell? If I can't jump over the blocks, I'll just bust right through them. I crashed right through the blocks and down a flight of stairs. My mom says she remembers me dragging my leg around for a couple of days after that. Finally, she took me to the doctor and my leg was broken. A year later, at 5 years old, I remember playing football at my brother Johnny's birthday party. I caught a pass and Johnny dove on top of me cannonball style and landed right on my arm. I didn't complain about it, but my mom noticed me favoring that arm and took me to the doctor, and what do you know? Another break. I had lots of broken bones growing up and never minded it. I remember hearing that when you break your bones, they grow back stronger. Chapter 2. If they draw first blood, no mercy, no remorse. In 1987, the movie First Blood came out on VHS. If you're not familiar with the movie, it is a classic. It's the first in the Rambo series starring Sylvester Stallone, and it is often mistakenly called Rambo 1. My dad, having been a Marine veteran in Vietnam, brought the movie home for me and my brothers to watch. In it, Stallone's character, John Rambo, is being harassed by cops in a small town. They see him as a vagrant and they lock him up. That was their first and last mistake. They drew first blood. And Rambo administered some beatings on these hillbilly cops and escaped from captivity. That stuck with me. And if anyone drew first blood on young STEPHAN Bonnar, it would be no mercy and no remorse. In 1988, I was excited about graduating from 5th grade from James B. Eves Elementary School in Munster, Indiana. It was the first day of school, and I was in a state of bliss outside with my friends. We were going to be able to play all day until 3:30 when we'd receive our diplomas. I had looked forward to this day as a young man with lots of energy, tired of sitting inside all day. My arch nemesis was Joe Sterling. Sterling and I would get along fine, and then for no reason at all, he would charge me. I'd beat him down, and we'd make up, and then he'd do it again. We were playing kickball, and Sterling was pitching. One of my buddies blasted a line drive in his face, and his glasses fell off. All the kids were laughing at him, and I laughed along with them. Out of nowhere, Sterling charges me, and I sprawl and hold him in place. I could have blasted him in the face with a knee or a kick. I just held him there peacefully because I didn't want to ruin his day. Our teacher, Mrs. Smith, comes over and can clearly see that I'm not fighting back, just restraining the little weasel Sterling. Instead of punishing him for attacking me, that bitch takes both of us into Principal Akers' office. Instead of enjoying the day, I spent the afternoon stuck in the principal's office, watching all my friends play outside. I was pissed, and Sterling had drawn first blood. At 3:15, Mrs. Smith brought us out to get in line and prepare to receive our diplomas and a bag of candy with the rest of the graduates. When they called the name STEPHAN Bonnar, I received a standing ovation from my classmates due to my epic shenanigans throughout my tenure at James B. Eves Elementary. After I received my diploma, I knew that justice had been served. With my diploma in hand, I tapped Sterling on his shoulder and drew back and blasted him with a Roger Clemens fastball punch to the face. If there were any Major League Baseball scouts at my graduation, they would have likely signed me to a developmental contract, even in the 5th grade. Sterling went down like a ton of bricks, and Principal Aker grabbed me by the neck, escorted me out the door, and said, quote, "Bonnar, I never want to see you on the school property again." I fired back and told him he drew first blood. Chapter 3, Tales of Redemption. I was a late bloomer, and my balls didn't drop until junior year of high school. I had wrestled since the 4th grade, but took a break from wrestling in my freshman and sophomore years of high school. Everyone showered together after practice, and I was embarrassed by my little wiener, and I had no pubic hair. This held me back a bit with the young ladies, but I was a horny little fella nonetheless. In 7th grade, I French kissed a girl for the first time, sucked on her titties, and may have even fingered her beeve. Oh my. For girls, their virginity is sacred and something they want to hold on to for as long as they can. Traditionally, some women wait for their wedding night for their first taste of carnal pleasure. For us boys, virginity is like a monkey with its claws dug deep in our back, and we're waiting to get it off. I was no different, which is why when the opportunity presented itself, it was time to get it off. Oh my. A couple of my best buds had bragged to me how they got their cherries popped by the local town slut. She was a strawberry blonde with big juicy titties. My buddy KJ offered me the chance in the batter's box, and I jumped at the opportunity. We went by the gas station and bought some lifestyle condoms. KJ got her ready for me, and when it was my turn at bat, she did most of the work. That Lifestyles condom was like a hefty bag on a twig of my little weenie. I enjoyed the experience, though, and went nearly 20 minutes before exploding into that condom, or so I thought. When I took the condom off, it was bone dry. My balls hadn't dropped yet, but this experience still put me on cloud 9. especially when the little cum dumpster told the guys at the party that I was better in the sack than KJ. Oh my. I lasted longer than guys would for their first time, but that was because of my little cocktail wiener was swimming in the lifestyle condom. I thought she was cool, but as you will find out, that was not the case. I was definitely a late bloomer, but my junior year, I'd shot up to 6'2", and puberty had struck. I was no longer embarrassed by the size of my manhood, and I returned to the wrestling mat. I started hanging out with this little hottie Jeannie, and we started doing the nasty. The first time I smashed her, she said something that surprised me in our post-game pillow talk. Quote, "You're not at all like I've heard," unquote. Replied, "What do you mean?" She said, "Well, the rumor is around school that you have a tiny dick." I said, "Rumor? How many people have heard this?" She replied, "Everyone." I knew at this point that I needed to redeem myself in the eyes and ears of my peers. The opportunity for redemption came at the turnabout dance my senior year of high school. I was always the guy with a fake ID, and I got a room for me and my date Kelly and my buddy and his date Rosalie. On that night, after I smashed Kelly, I took a turn with Rosalie Kime, who became my high school sweetheart. In the course of those two lovemaking encounters, I also conquered 2 lifestyle condoms. That meant a lot to me, having swam in the lifestyle condom, leaving it bone dry in my first carnal encounter. I told Kelly and Rosalie to spread word of my prowess throughout the hallowed halls of Munster High. From that night forward, I walked through those halls beaming with pride. I could feel the eyes upon me, knowing that they knew they were looking at one mighty studly young man. I began my wrestling career in 4th grade. Growing up in Munster, Indiana, most of my teammates and classmates were white. I was a lanky youngster, and as you know, a late bloomer. The Harvey Cyclones were all black wrestling team from outside Chicago, Chi-Town. They were a team of thick, stocky, super developed brothers with veins popping out of their arms, armpit hair, and jacked shoulders. When it was time to face them, the first time I ran and hid down by the railroad tracks, I finally got the courage to face them, and it wasn't as bad as I thought. I lost, but they could never pin me. It doesn't feel that bad to lose when you can chuckle watching your opponent puke into a bucket after getting their hand raised. My coach helped me conquer my fear by putting me in lots of matches with black kids. He gave me a valuable lesson when he told me, quote, "Don't worry, the black kids bruise too. You just can't see it." On one particular meet against the Harvey Cyclones, I remember watching my brother wrestle, and actually he beat one of them. He made an epic comeback after landing a great throw and scoring back points. This is the same brother who handed me some of my most merciless beatings of all time. These beatings helped make me the fighter I became. I wrestled my brother in the finals of some meets, and although he always won, he could never pin me. I could write an entire book just on the beatings my brother gave me. One in particular that I remember very well was when we both had a paper route and my brother had a new pair of gloves. We were riding our bikes, running our routes, and he blasted me in the head with his new gloves, and my head smashed against the concrete. I popped up to go after him and realized he was 2 blocks away. This was the first time I had ever been knocked unconscious. My brother Brent would be my buddy one day and beat my ass the next. Brent was 18 months older than me, and he had the edge growing up. He was an all-state linebacker, a tough kid. Here are a couple of other beatings I can remember my brother giving me. I was at one of our friends' houses, and our friend had touch-up spray paint. I painted the handles on my brother's bike, and figured he'd be happy that I touched them up. He came at me and said, "Did you fuck with my bike?" The next thing you know, he's got a wrench, and while I tried to run and hide, he ended up blasting me with it in the head, with blood squirting everywhere. Another time, I had left his Michael Jordan basketball outside, and he came looking for me to deliver a beating. I locked myself in the bathroom and could hear him taking the lock with his tools. I climbed through the window and tried to jump the fence, but he caught up to me and handed me another beating. While all of these beatings from Brent served to make me the man and fighter I became, I got redemption on him. This came in my junior year of college while home on Christmas break. By this time, I had hit my second growth spurt and was 6'4" and 215 pounds. Brent was always bigger and stronger than me, but he had let himself go. I was in my room at my parents' house on the phone with my girlfriend at the time, Jackie. Brent comes home and he is hammered and has been out at the local bar with Jackie's close friend Kelly, who I smashed back at the Turnabout Dance, senior year of high school. Brent is being a complete dick, grabbing the phone from me, trying to tell Jackie to put him over to Kelly. A complete amateur maneuver that my brother Brent should have known not to pull. He makes himself seem like a total ass clown, and I ripped the phone from him, and he's saying that Kelly is much hotter than Jackie, just making himself out to be a complete buffoon. I didn't do it, but I could have got on him about fucking Kelly and tell him he had my sloppy seconds and asked him, how'd my dick taste? I didn't do that, but I hear a loud sound and see a fist coming through the door. The foot is punching his way in this fool is punching his way in the room. Brent charges me in the room while I'm laying on the bed, and I duck under him and hit him with a double leg takedown. I get full mount and I am pounding the living shit out of him. My father grabs my arms and pulls me off, and while my dad has hold of my arms, Brent reaches up, grabs one of my testicles, and yanks as hard as he can. I was in a world of pain, and pissed off, I grabbed my suitcase, hopped in the car, and ended my Christmas break early, driving back to Purdue University. I had gotten my redemption on Brent, but it cost me a sore testicle. I grew up in a house of testosterone with two older brothers. You already know about Brent, but let me tell you about Johnny. Johnny is 3.5 years older than me and was a virtuoso on the guitar, a very smart kid, and one hell of a baseball pitcher. Growing up, my dad, who, as I told you, is a Vietnam veteran and Marine, always favored Johnny and Brent. My dad always favored Johnny and Brent. My dad poured so much attention into Johnny. Johnny was the star pitcher. Brent was the cool all-state football player, and I was the weirdo who did taekwondo. My father's time at this point was focused on Brent because Johnny had become a burnout since graduating high school. One of my favorite snacks growing up was the 20-cent burritos my mom would buy. I'd warm them up in the microwave and eat them with some cottage cheese. This was pure protein bliss for me growing up. At this point, you know Johnny had become a total burnout, and he was just getting drunk and high and following the Grateful Dead. I was only a sophomore in high school, and while my balls hadn't even dropped yet, I had years of taekwondo and wrestling under my belt. Johnny had been hitting the sauce and came at me in a rage one night as I was preparing one of my favorite burritos. He smacked the cottage cheese out of my hand and it went flying. As Johnny charged me recklessly, I shot a double leg on him and he went down and I got behind him. I knew the gable grip well by this point, so I gable gripped his neck and could hear him gargling. Johnny reached for his beer bottle And when he couldn't get into position to smash it over my head, he tried to break it so he could cut me with the charred glass. I just squeezed and squeezed as hard as I could until Johnny passed out. My dad came into the kitchen and saw my brother Johnny passed out on the floor. Johnny had thrown away all his talents to become a burnout after all the time and effort my dad had put into him. My father grew up in inner city Chicago and was a good athlete and football player. My father was also a Marine and Vietnam veteran. My dad was no stranger to a fight, and he had no time for Johnny's bullshit. I could see the pride in my father's eyes. It was the first time I'd ever seen him proud of me. My father looked at me and said, quote, "Good job, son, but next time, kill him." This was the greatest redemption of all, having conquered my older brother and earned my father's pride. Next chapter, how it feels to be tough. I had been wrestling since age 10, but had taken a hiatus, waiting for the little psycho to drop. I had also been doing Taekwondo for years, but I never imagined that at 15, not having even gone through puberty, I could beat a grown man's ass. That is until I went to the Scorpions concert with my buddies Scully and Scotland. My good friend Scully was a wise ass, and his mouth would write checks that his body couldn't cash. As a loyal friend, I was often there to get him out of a bind. I was a huge fan of the Scorpions and excited to be seeing them live. Scully had obviously said something to this guy who was well into his 20s, and it didn't sit right with him. Perhaps Scully was insulting his mullet or his lame goatee. This guy was a bully, and with his arms wrapped around my buddy's neck, and he was shaking him like Homer Simpson would shake Bart. I grabbed hold of this bully's arm and tore it off my friend's throat with a wrist lock. He stared me down and called me a tough guy. We didn't go to blows then and there because I was eager to see the concert. The Scorpions rocked it out and put on one hell of a show, but I had trouble enjoying it fully because this mullet-headed maggot was taunting me. He stared at me constantly throughout the concert, running his thumb across his throat, followed by a cheesy air guitar pointing at me like he was ready to kick my ass. This fellow was about 5'11" and 190 pounds or so. He was a full-grown man, and my balls hadn't even dropped yet. I was a tall, lanky 15-year-old, 5'10", 140 pounds, soaking wet. He probably thought he was going to smash me with ease, but he thought wrong. As the concert ended, this bully headed toward the gate, motioning his hands over his throat and shadow boxing, signaling to me he was ready to fight. As we got to the gate, he actually said, quote, "Wait, I gotta take a piss." There was no way, even at 15, that I was gonna wait for this guy to piss and come back to kick my ass. I told him I was ready to fight. We had all his friends standing around cheering him on, so he wasn't gonna back down. This was gonna be my first real deal fight with a full-grown adult. The bully stormed me, throwing a barrage of sloppy heaters. He gets into a clinch position and tears my shirt. Now, as a kid, I was always broke, and I'd saved up $20 to buy that Scorpions t-shirt. When he tore my shirt, I saw red and sprawled back. I drove 2 crisp, lean kicks into his face and followed that up by blasting him with a head kick. I remember I looked at him as he lied on the ground, reeling in pain, and said, "That's how it feels to be tough." I remember the look of astonishment on my friends' faces. Their jaws dropped. They were wide open. As a 15-year-old kid, I had beaten their beer-swelling friend's ass. This is the first time in my life that I realized that the skills I had developed had actually enabled me to kick a grown man's ass. In wrestling, I was a tall, lanky leg rider. I was a 5'10", 135 pound beanpole. And I'd been used to wrestle these jacked up, thick, short muscle heads. In wrestling, I'd always wished I could knee those kids in the head out of the clinch. This was a sign of what would come many years later. We had to get out of Dodge, and so me and my buddies ran to Scotland's dad's car and played it off like nothing had happened. As we were running to the car, we could hear the ambulance pull up with blinking lights. As the car pulled out of the area, we watched them load the poor bastard in the back. I didn't have a car yet, but the following year, I'd get my driver's license, buy my aunt's 1983 Toyota Tercel with 160,000 miles on it for $300. I would spend a lot of time cruising in that ride with my high school sweetheart, Rosalie Kime. Next chapter. Violence is a very powerful aphrodisiac. Every long-term relationship I have ever had in my life, including with my lovely wife Andrea, has been sealed by violence. So by now you all know about my high school sweetheart Rosalie and how our budding romance began with an evening of debauchery where I smashed her and my date Kelly on the same evening at the renowned Turnabout Dance. I achieved my redemption, breaking through 2 lifestyle condoms, and word of my sexual prowess spread throughout the hallowed halls of Munster High. I had sent Kelly and Rosalie on a mission to dispel the rumors that I had a little weenie. Now the entire school knew of my debaucherous ways, and I had to pick which one of these fair maidens I wanted to date. Kelly was so pretty, sweet, and loving. Rosalie possessed these same qualities, but she was also a bit crazy, and that was what made me choose Sweet Baby Rose as my high school sweetie. Rosalie's date at the Turnabout Dance was this fella Edgar that we called Fast Eddie. Eddie didn't appreciate me stealing his girl, and he had put some time in laying down his game at her family's house. Fast Eddie had endeared himself to Rosalie's folks, especially to her mama. In an attempt to pour salt on my game, Fast Eddie told Rosalie's mama of my debauchery and painted me out to be a raunchy villain. I tried to spend some quality time with Rosalie at her house, and as I left, Rosalie's mama began banging on my car window. She wasn't happy that I was fornicating with her daughter under her own roof, especially considering the lecher Fast Eddie had made me out to be. She told me she never wanted to see me at the house ever again. The next day at school, I confronted Fast Eddie and told him never to speak to Rosalie's mama about me again, but he refused. I brushed it off, but after school, I was hanging out with some buds outside the school, and who rolls up? None other than Fast Eddie himself. I tell Eddie once again to stay away from Rosalie's mama and not talk trash about me, but once again, he refuses. This time, he did so more arrogantly and tried to walk away, and as he did, I landed a swift kick that penetrated through his armpit and right under his choppers and his nose. Eddie goes down like a ton of bricks, and I pummel him until his friends pull me off. This eventually cost me a suspension, but the next day at school during first period, who walks in late after the bell with a busted up face? None other than Fast Eddie. Eddie looked at me and bowed his head. He had learned his lesson, and this beating won the heart of my Rosalie, and eventually led to her mom realizing I was a good fella after all. I was beginning to see violence as an aphrodisiac, but there were more lessons to come. I had been expelled in my junior year of high school and had gotten by with a C average. I had to do a year of junior college before I could be accepted into the big university, Purdue, where I ended up graduating from. The summer after junior college, I started dating a foxy young lady that had been a year behind me in high school. This young lady's name was Jackie, and she was so fine she could arouse a man on life support. This was my dream girl, and I was eager to begin breaking lifestyle condoms together. All throughout high school, Jackie had dated this guy, Ryan Sheets. I knew Ryan because we had played football together, and he played football and wrestled 2 weight classes below me at a rival high school, Lake Central. They were a powerhouse team in football and had won a few state titles. When I enrolled at Purdue, the dorms were full, so I was housed at Hilltop Apartments. These apartments were still student housing and had dorm police known as resident advisors, RAs, just like regular dorms. I had this roommate at the time who was a little pussy and not the kind that President Trump likes to fuck. Ironically, my room was directly across from Ryan Sheets. I had Jackie staying over a lot, and Sheets could hear us banging. I had just started fucking his girlfriend of 4 years, and it was really bothering Sheets. Sheets goes to Jackie and tells her he needs to talk to her because he's really heard about this. I tried to be the laid-back, cool guy and just chill and allow them to talk. So I told Jackie to just do what she had to do and get closure with the guy. A couple of days later, I'm riding my bike back from the gym. I used to ride my bike all over campus. There is Sheets drinking with his buds and laughing and pointing. He's talking shit about me. I told Sheets I wasn't to get into this with him there. I wasn't going to get into this with him there, and that I'd deal with him later, and I rode off. That night, I let Jackie know how Sheets tried to punk me out in front of his friends, and she knew I was pissed. A couple of nights later, I see Jackie with Sheets, and they're going into Sheets' apartment. I went around back and peeped through the window. There's good old Sheets putting on the moves and trying to kiss Jackie. He's putting his hands all over her. I really liked Jackie's father. He was an old school Sicilian guy, a mafioso type who wouldn't take shit from anyone, and I really admired him. I started thinking, what would he think if he saw this shit? I saw red and thought, what kind of man would let this happen? My answer was, not this kind of man, and I sprung into action. I gathered up my chi and screamed, "Wah!" as I unleashed a spinning back kick to the door as hard as I could. The door didn't even budge, but I was not deterred. I took a step back, took 2 deep breaths between the nasal, and stirred my chi up even more. One more time. Wah! And as I landed the spinning back kick, the door collapsed from its hinges. Just as Sheets tried getting up from the couch, I landed a flying knee, and he went down. I landed a barrage of elbows and fists until the resident advisor frantically arrived. Sheets was bloodied and battered, and he looked at me with sheer terror in his eyes. "Don't worry, Sheets. I've got nothing left," I told him as I was physically spent. I went out on the front porch as the cops arrived. I said, "Take me away, motherfuckers," the cops asked repeatedly. "Where are the drugs?" I told them that there were no drugs and that liquor chills me out. This beating was fueled purely by jealous rage. As I sat in jail that night, I thought that the lesson I had learned was to just let people be free and do what they want to do. There was much more to this story, though, as I would find when I got out of jail. When I got out of jail, I had a note that stated that I had until the end of the week to get all my shit out of the apartment. My pussy roommate was scared to death. This was a kid that if he ever found himself in a men's locker room, he'd be whistling Stranger in Paradise. He was scared to death of the American Psycho. I also received a letter from the dean of Purdue that I had a hearing regarding potential expulsion that Friday. Jackie approached me begging for forgiveness. I'm thinking now how I saw him putting the moves on her, and at that moment I thought she was a cunt, not on my side. I told Jackie I was getting expelled on Friday, and my message to her was, "Smell you later." A very common Bonnar quote. When the hearing came that Friday, I figured this was it, and my brief career at Purdue was over. I arrived at the meeting, and to my surprise, who walks in? None other than Jackie. As the dean is on the verge of expelling me, Jackie stands up and says to the dean, "Let me tell you what really went down that night." Jackie explains that she and I were dating and that Ryan Sheets was her old high school sweetheart he could not let go. She explains how she met with Ryan just to get closure with him, and he began forcing himself on her and was holding her against her will. She puts me over as her prince, saying that I witnessed what was going on and came in and saved him from his evil clutches and from inevitable rape. Obviously, my expulsion was dropped. From that point forward, Jackie became my college lover. My dear Jackie and I had an amazing time together throughout our collegiate career. I was welcomed into her home, and the American Psycho became her father's best paisano. He admired how I had beaten the living shit out of the evil Ryan Sheets and saved his daughter's honor. Jackie and I stayed together through all 4 years at Purdue until I graduated and moved to Chicago. When I graduated from Purdue and moved to Chicago, it was a glorious time. I was working as a personal trainer at an upscale gym and had a blast. I was going on 3 to 4 dates per week and partying it up, having my buddies over, since I grew up right outside of Chicago, Muncie, Indiana. At this time, I also started doing jiu-jitsu and boxing, and eventually MMA. I began competing in jiu-jitsu tournaments, then Golden Gloves boxing. I was training and competing in boxing because I eventually knew I was going to start fighting in MMA. I used martial arts as a tool to lead a balanced life with all this partying. It was there at Lincoln Park in Chicago where I met my future wife, Andrea. We began as friends for a full year, as I was her trainer and she had a boyfriend. We did a lot together, and she helped me decorate my apartment. She was a cool chick, and she worked for the news. We didn't start dating until 2001, when I had my first MMA fight. At the time, I was also training a girl named Kelly, who was smoking hot. Kelly invited me over to her place to watch Deuce Bigalow and Sex and the City, and we had a great time. I brought a bottle of wine for the occasion. A few nights after my evening at Kelly's place, it was my buddy Tom Scully's birthday, good old Scully. A bunch of my buds from back in college were back in town, and it was Christmas time. It was at the point with my job at the gym where my medical insurance was almost ready to kick in, because I was almost at that 90-day point. We had a great evening planned at Shannon's Landing, a local bar. And then we were planning on heading over to Fast Eddie's place. Now I know what you're thinking. What the hell would I be doing over at Fast Eddie's? Was I planning on bringing him some season's beatings for the holidays? Actually, Fast Eddie and I became buds again, as I found out he clubbed the guy who ratted on me like a seal with a shovel handle after the beating I gave him. Wow, let's read that one again. Fast Eddie, good stand-up guy. He clubbed the guy who ratted on me like a seal with a shovel handle after the beating that I gave him being Fast Eddie. We had a great night, and I was buying everyone shots. My gimmick was I had a ton of mini bottles stashed in my jacket, so the shots weren't costing me as much as they would at the bar. It was a glorious evening, and we picked up some chicks and had some other chicks we knew with us. My buddy Scully is a bit of a prankster, and as we were leaving the bar, he began ribbing some guys speaking in a southern accent. I turned to Scully and said, "Hey bro, let's leave these here inbreds. It's time to bail." After I said that, one of the 4 guys started mouthing off, saying they were going to kick our ass. The security guard from the bar was by the stairs, so I told him to please hold these guys up so we could leave. We left, but I didn't realize that at the other end of the exit was an elevator. We got to the top of the stairs, and these 4 goons exit the elevator. One of them grabs Scully. Now, at this point, I had just started boxing, but it was like the hand of Sugar Ray Robinson had come down and blessed my fist. I faked a jab, threw a left hook, and down he went like a sack of potatoes. The next guy comes and grabs me by the collar. I windmill his arm over and trap his arms and low kick him. He says, "Oh, you want to kick, pussy?" I went back to the jab left hook combination and boom, he goes down. I see Scully drop the 3rd guy, and I look at the 4th guy and harness my chi. Wah! And he scurries off, saying he was just there to watch the show. We head back to Fast Eddie's for an epic evening of debauchery. The next morning, I'm in brutal pain. I don't have medical coverage yet, so I ignore it for a few days. At the gym, I can't even lift my arm up, but luckily, one of the guys I was training's dad was a hand surgeon. I go in for an x-ray, and they say the good news is I don't have a break. The bad news is I need emergency surgery. Pus is pouring out of my hand like a hose. Apparently, there was a sizable tooth embedded in my hand, which I still have at home in a jar. I was laid up in the hospital for days, so I called the gorgeous Miss Kelly. When I told her what had happened, she went running for the hills. I called Andrea and told her the same story. She was single now and came to the hospital with her laptop for DVDs for us to watch, some snacks, and some amazing blowjobs. Andrea would eventually become my wife and the true love of my life. Yet another violent episode brought true love to the surface. Love has been sparked by violence in every serious relationship in my life. Hence the title, Chaotic Enlightenment, an American Psycho's Journey to Peace Through Violence. And I believe, no, there are 2 more chapters to go. The next chapter, sometimes it's best to lock your best friend in the trunk. Or sometimes it's best to lock your friend in the trunk. I had an internship in my last year at Purdue, living in downtown Chicago. After graduating, I got a job working for Gold's Gym, and I saved up enough money to get a little 500 square foot apartment in Lincoln Park. Very nice area. Now, I know what a lot of you are thinking as you read this. You all hear on the news that Chicago is a cesspool of depravity with rampant crime. Well, that's true when it comes to the area we call Chirac. But I guarantee that if you go to the Gold Coast of Lincoln Park areas of Chicago today, you will find it's still a very nice area. There were ghettos not far from my apartment where I lived there nearly 20 years ago, but they always did a good job keeping the trash out of Lincoln Park and Gold Coast, the 2 nice areas of Chicago. My apartment in Chicago was tiny, but we had some epic parties there. This was when Andrea and I first began dating. And one night I introduced her to my good buddy, Barry. Now, Barry is 8 or 9 years sober now, but he's been an airline pilot for 20 years since graduating college. Pilots find themselves in cities overnight with nothing to do, and they often party all night, before flying out the next morning. Pilots get drug tested all the time, so since they can't do any drugs, they get tanked. This was Barry's lifestyle at the time, and he was a belligerent and rude drunk. I had purchased a nice bottle of wine for the occasion on this particular evening. The American Psycho loved the vino, and Barry quickly aced the bottle. Barry aced the bottle by himself. We had home liquor delivery in Chicago, and when the delivery man came into the apartment, Barry started threatening him, refusing to pay him. Then one of my neighbors stopped by to complain, and Barry threatened to beat his ass. I had I had put the four of us, me, Barry, Andrea, and my buddy Troy, that was over on the list at a bar in Lincoln Park near the hotel. So I had put the four of us, STEPHAN, Barry, Andrea, and his buddy Troy, on the list at this nice bar in Lincoln Park. As it's time to get in the car, Barry is getting more and more out of hand. He starts calling Andrea a bitch, and she wants me to beat his ass. Andrea and Troy asked me to please just choke Barry out and put him in the trunk. That's where the American Psycho name came from Chris Lieben when they were in the house, when he choked, when Psycho told a story about choking someone out, putting him under the bar. Troy pops the trunk, and we grab Barry and start to put him in. Barry and I have been friends for a long time, and I start to feel badly about it as Barry is begging me not to close the trunk. After Barry promised to be on his best behavior, I decided to let him come out with us. Lets him out of the trunk. As we go into the bar, I was unable to find Barry. I look across the bar, and I see him in the bouncer's face. Now, Barry is only 5'7". This bouncer is 6'5" and ready to toss him out on his ass. I come over with Andrea and pull Barry away, and Barry starts calling Andrea a stupid bitch. Andrea has had enough at this point and walks out of the bar, and I give chase to calm her down. Barry follows me, and as I look over my shoulder, I see Barry pass out in the bushes. I figure this is a good thing because now I can cool Andrea down and go back later and get Barry. By the time I go back to find Barry in the bushes, all I see is a body print of where he had been laying. Where had old Captain Smithers disappeared to? This was before the time when everyone had a cell phone, so we just let it go. The next morning, the phone rang at my apartment, and it was Barry. He needed us to go pick him up as he had apparently spent the night in the drunk tank. After he'd gotten out of the bushes, he had gotten into a random apartment, opened the refrigerator, cracked a brew, and pounded it and passed out on the couch. The owners of the apartment obviously called the cops, and they let Barry sleep it off in the drunk tank. Barry would have had a better night had I just stuffed him in the trunk, as Andrea and Troy wanted me to do. The moral of this story is that sometimes it's best to lock your friends in the trunk. Final chapter. This is a great one. If you're going to get busted in Iceland is a good place to be. If you're going to get busted, Iceland is a good place to be. The year is 2006, post-Ultimate Fighter finale. And after my fight with Sam Hoger, my next opponent is slated to be James Irving. But first, I escaped for some R&R. One of my buds was living in Reykjavik, Iceland, and me and the infamous Tom Scully headed to Scandinavia to raise some hell and smash some Nordic beauties. Tom Scully should not drink. Now, for me to say that, you know he has to have a serious problem. When Scully hits the sauce, you know it's just a matter of time. He goes downright insane. It's like a broken record with Scully. There he is, dancing like a fool with another man's woman. Of course, I have to come to the rescue and try to talk it out with the bouncer. Our buddy Scotty, who worked out there, was what we call a jiu-jitsu pussy. He will roll in class to get in shape, but he's going to take cover when the fists start flying. The bouncer makes us all leave the club at once with this guy Scully is beefing with. This obviously means it's on when we leave the club. Out of nowhere, Scully blindsides me and tackles me and starts brawling with me to make these guys think he's insane. The tactic doesn't work, and we engage them in some brawling. I drop one guy with a spinning back kick and get behind the next guy and choke him out. There's one guy left, and he's brawling with Scully hockey style, meaning they're pulling each other's shirts over their head and swinging. I pull that guy off, and he's on a hill, and I put him in a choke. Now, choking him out would be the humane way to dispose of him. But I had just watched Chuck Liddell's Greatest Knockouts DVD on the plane to Iceland. I think of Chuck's knockout of Randy the Natural Couture, and I wanted to land a shot like that on this jabroni. I let him out of the choke and timed the punch as he's falling back down the hill. It was a vision of beauty that would have made the Iceman proud, knocking him down the hill. My next memory is of stretching and yawning, thinking I was warm and cozy in my bed. But when I saw my surroundings, I realized I was in a jail cell. Upon further reflection, I realized this jail cell was in Reykjavik, Iceland. My shirt is a crimson cascade of blood, and my hand is throbbing in pain. The cop came by to ask me for a statement, but I needed a minute to piece together what had happened. My buddy Scotty comes in and refreshes my memory. We would mostly claim self-defense, and that there were more of them than of us. Iceland is a socialist country with $30 hamburgers, but instead of being bailed out, they gave me a court date. 3 days later, a hotel suite to stay in, and a per diem to party with. I partied like a rock star and met a gorgeous platinum blonde, 18-year-old beauty, and we had an amazing evening to remember. I actually ran out of Jimmy's with her and washed out one of Scotty's used ones. Oh man, I actually ran out of Jimmy's and he washed out one of Scotty's used ones. Oh my. The next few days, I partied and relaxed in the spectacular hot springs of Iceland. When my court date came, I lucked out. Apparently the guy who I punched was a troublemaker, notorious for beating up tourists. I received a 10-year ban from Iceland, which has now long since expired. On the way back to the States at the airport, I ran into the man who inspired me to throw that punch, the one and only Iceman, Chuck Liddell. Imagine that. Chuck smiled proudly like he knew what I had done. And when he shook my hand with all his power, he exacerbated my injury. Oh my. Final paragraph. I had an x-ray done on my hand saying that I had injured it in training. No one knew anything about what had gone down in Iceland, nor did they have any suspicion to Google it or investigate. Joe Rogan showed an x-ray of my hand on TV saying I had hurt it in training and had a legitimate reason not to fight James Irving. All in all, getting busted in Iceland wasn't such a bad experience. If you're ever watching Chuck Liddell's Greatest Knockouts and thinking of hitting the bars to emulate the Iceman, it might not be a bad idea to buy yourself a flight to Iceland. If you like burgers, bring some cash. Man, that's it. Now you feel like you're hanging out with my good buddy, American Psycho. What great stories. What a great celebration. Thank you for listening.